Welcome to Psych 230, Social Psychology. Today we're starting a new chapter. We're starting chapter 6, the chapter on social influence, which actually overlaps with the last chapter we talked about. The last chapter was on attitudes and persuasion. And social influence, well, that includes persuasion as well, but we're dealing with it as talking about it as a separate chapter. Okay, we're gonna, well, I don't have an outline for you guys, I guess, but just something here to get us started that all involves social influence. Have you ever asked a friend what was appropriate to wear to a dinner party, to dinner, to a party, to a wedding? Okay. Have you ever done that? Okay. Have you ever agreed to buy something you didn't want? Agreed to attend a social event because someone else asked you to. Maybe you didn't really want to go, but they asked you to, right? Have you ever changed your behavior in response to a direct order from a police officer, a parent, a teacher, or a school official? If the answer to any of that is yes, then of course you've been subject to social influence. And of course we all are. This happens all the time. Every day there are people trying to influence us. And every day, I think we more or less in one form or another, we do submit, we do go along with some of this, okay? We are influenced. And there are different ways that you can be influenced. Oh, here's the chapter outline. So that was just to get us started. Here's the outline. So we're going to talk about different kinds of social influence, categories of social influence. We're going to talk about conformity. We're going to talk about compliance and obedience. And you have to know the difference between all those three. They are not the same thing, but they're all types of social influence, okay? And then we'll eventually get to the goals of social influence. Why do we allow ourselves to be influenced? Because we want to choose correctly. We want social approval, and we want to be consistent with our commitments. That's what we're going to talk about, right, throughout the whole chapter, but we're not going to get to everything today. So let's get started. Actually, first we're going to define social influence. What is social influence in general? Social influence is a change in overt behavior caused by real or imagined pressure from others. So a change in overt behavior. So a change, you could say, to keep it simple, in behavior, and change in what you do, right? Because you believe that certain people want you to behave a certain way, or maybe because people really are pressuring you. Sometimes the pressure is imagined. No one's telling us anything, but we still go along with the group because we feel pressured because the group is doing something, okay? Sometimes someone will literally tell us, please do this, or I want you to do this, and if you don't, then I'm gonna hurt you, or something like that, right? We'll talk about those types of social influence. But all that is social influence. It means that you, to some extent, change your behavior because there is some pressure, whether it's real or whether it's just in your head. You go along with something. All right, one type of social influence is called conformity. Conformity is when you change your behavior to match, right, the responses or actions of other people. There's no pressure necessarily. When you conform, no one's really telling you to do anything. You just go along with the group. You go along with what other people are doing. Example would be casual Friday at work. Let's say you have a job, right? You work at a certain place, and Friday is casual Friday, or Friday is Hawaiian shirt day, or something like that. And that day, you don't show up formally dressed like you normally would. Maybe you wear a Hawaiian shirt, something like that. And that's what people do. And they don't necessarily tell you, hey, man, you better wear that Hawaiian shirt or we're going to fire you. But you go along with the group. You conform. Okay? They don't necessarily tell you to do it. It's just what people are doing, and you do what they do. Okay? Another example would be, for instance, I think I mentioned this before in a previous chapter, but another example would be that let's say you go to a nudist colony, right? You go to one of these nudist colonies up in the mountains somewhere, and you show up there, and you're wearing all your clothes, and everybody else is naked. And no one tells you, hey, man, you better get naked, or we're going to kick you out, we're going to punish you, or something like that. but everybody's naked except you. And research shows that after several days, you end up getting naked too. That's what happens. You don't want to at first, but after a while, it's like, what the heck, right? Everybody else is doing it. Could be a nude beach, right? Maybe a topless beach or something like that. It comes in many, many forms. We do it without even realizing it. We conform every single day. Every single day we go along with the group. We do what other people are doing. Okay, those were just some interesting examples I thought I'd bring up. Now, to make this a little bit boring, let's talk about research, okay? Let's talk about Ash's research. Ash, that was the person's last name. I don't remember the first name, but Ash did this study to illustrate how conformity works. So Ash recruited participants, okay? And he asked them to match one line with 3 other lines. So he asked the participants, which of the lines on the left, 1, 2, or 3, most closely match line A on the right? And you can see the answer is obvious, okay? The answer should be number 1. Okay, that's the one that most closely matches, okay? But what if there were 6 other people and they all said the answer was 3? So here's the thing about this experiment. There were other people who were supposedly just like you, just participants who had been recruited. In reality, they are part of the study, but you don't know that. And they are there. They ask them first what they think, and they all say it's 3, okay? And then they ask you, which line most closely matches line A? Are you going to conform? Are you going to go along with the group? Just because they said it was 3, all of them said it was 3. Notice, no one is telling you, you better say 3. No one is telling you that. Do you go along with the group? What Ash found was that 95% of participants, got all the answers correct. When they were alone, 95% of them correctly indicated the correct answer. So in other words, they know that it most closely matches line 1. Okay, 95% of them. I guess some of them had a little trouble. Maybe their vision is not so good, right? But the thing is, when other people gave the wrong answer first, the other 3 participants, the other fake participants, phony participants, which by the way are called Confederates, that's what they're called. That's the terminology, right? 75% of them gave the wrong answer. When other people said it was 3, 75% of them went along with the group. Think about that, right? They knew what the answer is. They were asked when they were alone, and they were asked then in the presence of those 3 other people. 75% of them, 3 out of 4, basically deliberately gave the wrong answer. They conformed. They went along with the group. Think about what this means, right? When you're a part of a jury, and maybe you're the only one who thinks that person is innocent. Everyone else thinks they're guilty. Are you going to go along with the group? Are you going to conform? Or are you going to say, no, you guys are wrong, right? And this is why. Or maybe you go to a coffee place with some friends. And they say, oh, doesn't this taste great, right? This coffee? And they say, yeah, this tastes good, right? Several people say it tastes good. And you think it tastes like crap. Are you going to tell them that? Or are you going to say, yeah, it tastes good, right? Are you going to conform? This study suggests that most of the time you will conform. Most people will just go along with the group, even if they disagree. And that could be something simple, like just coffee, right? Tasting coffee and agreeing whether it tastes good or not. Or it could be something very serious, like convicting someone for a crime that he or she maybe did or did not do. Okay. Now, what about compliance? What is compliance? Compliance is another form of social influence. Compliance is when you change your behavior in response to a direct request. It's a request, okay? So with compliance, there is some pressure. They ask you, hey, will you give some money to charity? Will you buy this car? Will you go out with me? That kind of stuff. Those are attempts at compliance. With conformity, no one tells you anything. It's just that something is happening and you feel pressured to do the same thing because they are doing that thing. No one tells you to do it. Here, somebody asks you something. Will you please do this? Will you study with me, right? Can I copy your answers? Will you give money to charity? Will you volunteer for this? Will you give me a ride? That kind of stuff. If you agree, then you are complying. You comply. To comply actually means to agree. Okay, that's compliance. That's another form of influence, social influence. Okay, now there are different, you should say, compliance strategies, different strategies to get people to do what you want them to do, to get them to agree with you, to get them to buy something for you, go out with you, study with you, whatever it is, to get people to comply. We're going to talk about a few of those techniques. And they're very, very commonly used by salesmen, by the way. So a lot of the examples I will point out will have to do with salesmen and buying a car, for instance. Sometimes I'll mention other examples as well. So one of these compliance techniques is the foot in the door technique, which a lot of you have probably heard of. The foot in the door technique. It's called the foot in the door technique because it literally means you have to try to get your foot in the door, okay? So in the past, these door-to-door salesmen would come to your house and they would be there and they would say, "Can I come in?" They would ask you that. And you being a nice person, you would say, "Sure, you can come in. You look like a nice person. Go ahead, you can come in." All right. That meant that you just agreed with something. You let them in your house, and now it's going to be hard for you to say no when they try to sell you something. Okay? They're going to do their little presentation, and they're going to tell you at the end if you want to buy that. You let them in. You said yes to letting them in. Now it's going to be hard to say no, right? That you don't want to buy their stuff. So the foot in the door technique is a technique where you use a small request first. You ask for something that's no big deal at first, right? In order to increase acceptance of a larger request. Like what door-to-door salesmen used to use, right? Like, "Can I come in? Can I get my foot in the door, right? Can I come in?" You say yes, right? And then later on, "Will you buy these overpriced pots and pans? Will you buy these overpriced portraits?" The things they were selling you were always overpriced, always way too expensive. Okay? Why? Because they work on commission. They got to sell those things at a profit. So they will charge a lot more than those things are really worth. 2, 3, 4 times as much. The more they can sell them for, the more money they make. Okay? That's the foot in the door technique. You literally ask for something that's no big deal at the beginning, and then you ask for something that is a big deal. Another example would be, "Will you sign this petition to reduce poverty?" Right? No big deal. And you say, "Sure, I believe in, reducing poverty, right? So I'll sign this petition. Yeah, that we should do something about it." Okay, you just said yes to something, right? To signing the petition. And then after that, they ask you, "Okay, will you donate some money to the cause?" That is much harder to do. But the fact that you said yes to one thing means that you're more likely to say yes to the second thing. That's the foot in the door technique. They get you to agree with something that's no big deal at the beginning, and then they follow it up with something that is a big deal. And those two things are related. Will you sign this petition? Now, will you donate some money? Or will you volunteer your time to help us out? The fact that you say yes to the first thing increases the chances you'll say yes to the second thing. By the way, if they just come out and ask you, "Hey, will you give us some money for this cause?" You're more likely to say no. They will be less successful in getting money out of you that way. That's the foot in the door technique. It's happened to me. They call me up. The school that I went to, USC, calls me up and they ask me, "Hey, we're raising money for the school," or whatever. I don't know exactly how they start, but they said, "Hey, will you give us $1,000, right? Will you give us $1,000? Will you donate $1,000 to our cause so we can provide scholarships and financial aid to students who may not be otherwise be able to afford to go to USC. It's a very expensive school, right?" Actually, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the next technique. They come out and say, "Oh yeah, never mind. That's the next one. I'm getting ahead of myself." So the foot in the door technique is that they ask you for a small request first, and then they follow up with something that is harder, right, to do. And you're more likely to agree to the second thing if you agree to the first thing. Other examples have to do with dating, right? When you're dating, you don't just come out and say, hey, you want to have sex with me, right? No way, right? It's like, hey, like, what's your name? Can I have your number, right? You want to have some coffee, that kind of stuff. You get them to agree to that first, right? And then later on, you build up to the big things, right? You got to get your foot in the door first. That's the foot in the door technique, right? To give you another example. Because the opposite technique is called the door in the face technique. This one is different. The door in the face technique is the technique where first you use a large request to increase acceptance of a subsequent smaller request. So the door in the face technique is where you ask for something at the beginning that is a big deal. It's hard to agree to it. And then you ask for something that's no big deal. You start out with the big thing, right? And they're likely to disagree. And then you follow up with a smaller thing that they're more likely to agree with, right? So here's the example that has to do with USC. That's a more appropriate example for this one, okay? I could have reversed it for the other, but this is more appropriate for this, right? USC calls me up and say, hey, we're trying to raise some money to help those students that might be in financial need or something, and to provide scholarships and financial assistance. Will you donate $1,000? And of course you say, hey, I don't have $1,000. I'm not giving you guys $1,000. Are you crazy? I'm not made of money, right? And then after that, they ask, well, how about 20? Will you give us $20? $20 seems so small, so insignificant in compared to the $1,000 that you say, fine, I'll give you guys $20. If they just come out and ask you for $20, you'll probably say no. But they ask you for something that's outrageous first. Will you donate $1,000, $10,000? You say, no, I don't have that kind of money. Well, how about 20 then? They're more likely to agree to 20. They're more likely to agree to the second thing because they rejected the first thing that was outrageous. So the small thing, the second thing seems like really insignificant in comparison. It's the contrast effect here. All right. It's like you ask your parents, hey, mom, dad, hey, can I have, $500 so I can go, on a trip this weekend? And they say, hell no, you can't. I'm not giving you $500. Like, no, you cannot go, on a trip for the whole weekend. The hell are you talking about? Well, then can I have $20 to go to the movies? Sure, you can have $20. You can go to the movies, right? That kind of stuff. Okay. That's the door in the face technique. Another example would be, where you're buying a car, let's say. You want to buy a car. And the dealership at the beginning, they always want you to pay some outrageous price for the car, almost always. Right? You're interested in some car. Let's say it's a $20,000 car. And you like it, right? You test drive it, and then you go to sit down to negotiate, see if you're going to buy the car. And they come up to you and they quote you this price. They say, well, here, will you give us $25,000 for this car? It's a $20,000 car. They want $25,000 for it. Maybe even $30,000, right? But let's say they want 25. Okay. And you say, hell no, I'm not giving you guys 25. That's not a $25,000 car. It's no way. I'm not giving you guys 25. They say, well, what about 24? No. What about 23? No. 22. And there you are negotiating, haggling. By the time you get to the real price of the car, which is 20,000, you feel like you're getting a great deal. And you agree to give them 20,000 for the car. In reality, they're still making money. That's the real price of the car. They just tried to sell it to you for a much higher price first, so they can make a bigger profit, bigger commission for the salesman or the salesperson, right? I've seen this happen, at an outrageous level, right? I have an aunt who, basically went and bought one of these $20,000 cars for $32,000 because she didn't know what she was doing, and they took advantage of her. They take advantage of women, by the way. That's discrimination there, or sexism. Discrimination has to do with sex. It's called sexism. But that's what happens. Do not agree to the first price. It is inflated, especially on luxury cars. You buy a luxury car, those are very profitable. That $60,000, that $80,000 car, they're probably making $20,000, $10,000 profit on that thing. You got to knock that down. The more expensive the car, the more you can reduce the price, because that's the door in the face technique. They always hit you with a very high price first, and if you're smart, you'll say no, and then you get a better price later. and you feel like you're getting a great deal, but you're not. You got a normal deal, okay? But if you don't know what you're doing, you can really get taken advantage of, okay? That's the door in the face technique, right? First, ask for something outrageous, and then you follow it up with something that's no big deal. Here's another one for you guys, another compliance technique, another way to get people to agree with you more with what you're trying to get them to do. It's the bait and switch technique. This one's really devious. It's really awful. And it's supposed to be illegal, supposedly, when you're buying a car. But no, they do it all the time. Actually, I'm not sure if it is illegal. Maybe I'm getting confused with something else. But the bait and switch technique is first when they present you with one scenario, and then they change it on you after you have agreed to it. Okay? Happens a lot when you're going to buy a car. You agree, let's say you see, there's several versions of it, but let's say you see a car for sale in the paper, or maybe online or in a commercial, right? There's some $20,000 car and they have it on sale for $15,000. Like, wow, it's $5,000 off, it's 25% off. So you rush over there to the dealer and say, hey, I want that car, right? So you see a car for sale in the paper or in the newspaper or online or in a commercial, right? A car for sale at a great price. So you go to the dealer, and what happens when you get there? They tell you, oh, we sold that one already. There was only one at that price and we sold it already. Will you buy this one instead? It's the same car. It just will cost you $25,000 instead. They're not going to tell you it costs 20, but they try to sell you another car instead, and that one's much more expensive. They don't have the one they advertised. That cheap one, it's not there. They sold it to somebody else. Sometimes it's not even at the dealer. Sometimes it exists. It exists. They haven't sold it. We say, oh, that one's at the factory. We don't have it here. We can't sell you that one. It's like, well, then get it over here. I want that one. I have literally told them that. Like, no, you can't have that one. Right? That's the bait and switch technique. And they try to sell you the more expensive one. If you're smart, you know what you're doing, you get the hell out of there and say, no, that's not what I came for. I'm not paying you guys that much. You said you had this car at this price. Sometimes you literally will see all those commercials, especially during a holiday weekend, the Labor Day sale weekend or the President's Day weekend or whatever it is. And they have all these deals, all these sales, all these car commercials. You go over there and it's like, what are you talking about? This is the price of the car. No, we're not selling them for that, right? That kind of stuff. They are so devious, right? That's the bait and switch technique. They literally change it on you after you have agreed to it or after you said you wanted it. Okay, but in that case, that actually they didn't make you didn't agree to anything, but they switched it on you. They lured you in with something and they switch it on you. But it could be even worse than that, where basically you agreed to buy a car, at a certain price, right? They agree, or let's say that you say, hey, you know what? I'm not paying that much. So you go home and they call you up and say, hey, man, we'll give it to you at that price. We have it here. So you go back to the dealer. And then the person you talk to who was going to give you that price, you say, oh, that person's nowhere around. Oh, no, we don't have that car. We still have just these, right? They're just switching things on you. But of course, you're all excited. You want the car. So many times you will just go along and just buy the more expensive car. That's bait and switch. It happens in many forms, right? And it happens a lot at car dealerships. But it could also happen with a house. It could happen, with really anything. Okay? Or maybe on a dating site, right? You think you're talking to someone, right? And you see their picture, and then you meet them and you realize, oh my God, you don't look like your picture at all, right? You're a lot older than that, or, that kind of stuff. People can do that with you without you realizing. Everyone presents themselves the best way, like online. People don't always look like that. Many times they don't. That's their best picture from a really good angle, maybe with filters, all kinds of stuff, right? And then you meet them and you realize, oh my God, you're just not who I thought you were. That's kind of like bait and switch on a social level, but it happens a lot, especially with salesmen. Okay, they're trying to sell you insurance or whatever it is. They use this all the time. It's happened to me with insurance as well, but I'll spare you the story. Okay, I think you get the point. Another devious technique to increase compliance is the lowball technique. This sounds like the bait and switch technique, but it's not the same thing. The lowball technique is when you're first presented with one scenario, and then they say there was an error after you agreed to buy it. there's actually an error in the price. Let me be specific. The lowball technique, they literally say that they made a mistake, that there's an error in the price, right? So you agreed to buy a car at a certain price, 20,000, let's say, right? You agree to that. They agree, right? And then you take the car home, and then they call you later, maybe days later or something, and they tell you, hey, you know that car you bought? We made a mistake. We made a miscalculation in the price. If you want to have the same monthly payments, you have to give us a bigger down payment. Or you owe us money. We made a mistake on the price. It is not a mistake. They did it on purpose. They're trying to get more money out of you. And you could disagree, say, I'm not giving you any more money. I agreed to a certain price. I'm not giving you any more. If they want to, literally, the car dealership, they can take the car back. They can take it away from you. But they will also do this in person. You agreed to buy a car at a certain price. And, supposedly you have a deal, you shake on it. And then they tell you, oh, let me go check with my manager. And they tell you, oh, I'm sure it will be fine. Let me just go make sure that everything's okay with my manager. And they go, they supposedly have a talk, right? They don't do anything. They come back sometime later and they tell you, you know what? We made a mistake. We can't give it to you at that price. We forgot to include this and this cost, right? It actually has air conditioning. It has anti-lock brakes. So we need to charge you more for it. It's a bunch of bull, right? They actually did it on purpose. There's no mistake. They did that to you. The price is always higher. It's never in your favor. They never tell you, we made a mistake, we charge you too much. It's called the lowball technique. It happens in real estate too, right? You see a home for sale at a certain price, you get all excited. Oh, wow, that's a good deal. You call them up and they say, hey, what are you talking about? No, that's not the price. Oh, that must be a typo or something. They did it on purpose. Now you're all excited about the home and you might still buy it. That's the lowball technique. As you might see, I don't like salesmen very much, right? Because they're often very dishonest, but they do have to make a living, and they use these techniques for that. But, these techniques can be used for all sorts of things, it's not just for salesmen. Politicians can do this. They do it all the time. People in general, and you can be nice about it and still use these techniques, but there's some that are really devious and really mean, really awful, so dishonest, some of these people, right? But they're not all bad. They do have to, I've met some nice salesmen. Most of them, they're what you call sharks, right? They will eat you alive if you don't know what you're doing, right? They will take advantage of you. Okay, so that's compliance. Now, what about obedience? What is obedience? So notice, we talked about conformity. That's when you go along with the group. No one told you to do anything. You go along with the group. The pressure, when it comes to conformity, is imagined. With compliance, there's real pressure. They ask you, hey, will you pay this much for this car? Will you buy this, right? Will you go out with me, this or that, whatever. That's compliance. Obedience, it's even more direct, even stronger. With obedience, right? This is when you change your behavior in response to a direct order from an authority. Somebody tells you, you better do this or else, or I'm going to punish you, right? They don't have to tell you they have to punish you. You know they can. Like you pull over because a cop tells you to, right? There you are driving and they flash the siren on you, right? They're basically telling you, pull over. So you pull over, you obey. If you don't obey, you're going to jail. They're gonna, they might, chase you or whatever it is. And then when they stop you, they're gonna throw your butt on the ground and maybe beat you or whatever it is. So you know that there can be punishment coming, so you obey. Or your parent tells you, hey, clean your room. You clean your room, because if you don't, maybe they're gonna, ground you or something. Or if they're really mean, maybe they'll beat you or something like that. The teacher tells you, right, hey, you better do your homework, right? If you don't, what happens? Then you get a 0 for that, okay? That's obedience. Obedience, somebody tells you to do something, and if you don't do it, you get punished. That's obedience, okay? Or you're afraid that you'll get punished, okay? That's obedience. It's much stronger form of social influence. Now, when it comes to obedience, we have to talk about Milgram's, what's known as the Milgram Study. A lot of you probably heard about it, maybe in Psych 101. It takes a bit of time to explain the Milgram studies, so I'm going to give you the just the basics, just so you can get the gist of it. The Milgram study, right? Milgram's shocking procedure. Stanley Milgram did a study, I believe it was in the 70s, to determine just how far people will go when it comes to obeying someone of authority. So participants were recruited for this experiment, and the experiment was presented as an experiment on the effects of punishment on memory. We want to know how punishment affects memory, okay? And the participants basically are asked to deliver painful electric shocks to another fellow participant. And that other participant is actually not a real participant. It's a bogus participant. So you think there's this other person that you're being asked to shock, right? You think they're just like you, but in reality, they are not. They're part of the experiment, and you don't know that. So here's the thing. The experiment, supposedly they assign people randomly to conditions. Supposedly somebody's going to be asked to be the teacher, and someone's going to have to be the learner. And the job of the teacher is to teach, right, the learner a certain list of words. And when the learner makes mistakes, you have to punish the learner with electric shock, okay? And it's rigged so that you, as the real participant, always get to be the teacher so that you can supposedly shock the learner. The learner is a bogus participant. The learner is not really being shocked. He's part of the experiment. He's going to pretend to be in pain just to see how far you will go and hurt this person. So the fellow participant is not a real participant. It's what we call an actor or a confederate. I don't know why they call them confederates. I guess the confederates are kind of, if you think about the South and all that stuff, confederates like someone who's not on your side. They're like traitors or something like that, right? But basically they pretend to be on your side, but they're not, okay? So they use that term for that, okay? So it's a fake participant that pretends to be just like you, but they're not, okay? It's an actor. It's someone who's going to pretend, right? They're going to pretend that they are in pain when you shock them. They're not really getting shocked. By the way, they have you try out the shock, and you know that it hurts. But in reality, they're not really hooked up to any wires. They're not really being shocked. The learner, the fellow participant, tells you, even worse, right, that he has a heart condition. It's a he in this study, by the way. He has a heart condition. He has a bad heart. And your job is going to be to shock this person when he makes a mistake. You are told that you are to shock him with increasing voltage after every incorrect response. They make a mistake, you shock them. If they make another mistake, you shock them at a higher level. You increase the voltage and then you shock them. Make a mistake again, you increase the voltage, shock them again. The voltage starts at 15, goes all the way to 450. And you're told that if you get to 435, you might kill the person. 435 is possibly deadly. And this person has a heart condition. You might even kill them before that. All along the way, the experimenter, the person of authority, is going to be telling you, the real participant, to shock that person, to continue. And they want to see to what extent you will obey. So the person makes a mistake on purpose, you shock him, right? Makes another mistake, you shock him, right? You might look uncomfortable, you look over the experiment, and he tells you, continue. Shock him, right? When you get to 120 volts, the confederate, the phony participant, says, hey, this hurts. Oh, this really hurts, right? He yells out like that. If you get to 150, he's pleading. He says, get me out, get me out, get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. Get me out of here, right? He's literally yelling, screaming to be let out, right? Later, let me out, let me out. Even later, right? You keep going, you keep increasing the voltage, shocking him because you're being told by someone of authority, right? Even later, there is silence. Maybe you killed him already. That's what you might be thinking, right? Throughout the experiment, participants are told to continue by the experimenter, by the person of authority. Please go on, please continue. Shock him. But I don't want to, it's okay, shock him. That kind of stuff. They want to see how far will you go. To what extent will you hurt someone, potentially kill someone, just because someone of authority is telling you to do so? Here's what they found. How far did they go? How much did they obey? Results showed that 65%, about 2 out of every 3 participants, continued all the way to 450. Think about that. That is shocking, right? Not only are they using electric shock in the experiment, no one's really getting shocked, but it's literally shocking that 2 out of every 3 people would be willing to kill someone, potentially kill someone, just because someone of authority tells them to do so. All the way to 450, and someone who has heart trouble. That is shocking, right? People were, just amazed by the results. This is one of these classic studies. And here's the thing about this. Milgram didn't think about this all on his own. Social psychologists didn't think, oh, let's do this cool experiment about just to see to what extent people will obey. There's a reason this experiment was done. And it was because of what happened during Nazi Germany, right? During that, during the Holocaust, right? During World War II, during that time, right? How was it that so many people, right, obeyed Hitler and killed millions of innocent people, millions of Jewish people, and not just Jewish people, but people they considered inferior. They killed gypsies. They killed, other people they considered inferior. Hitler didn't strangle all those people himself. He didn't gas them himself, shoot them himself. He gave orders, and he was someone of authority. And by the way, if you disobey Hitler, you would get shot in the head. Okay? You wouldn't just lose your job, they'd kill you. So people were obeying someone of authority, and people were shocked. How is this possible? How can people do such a thing? So Milgram decided to do this study to see, hey, could such a thing happen here? Is this normal? Turns out it is. It could happen here. People, to a large extent, will obey someone of an authority. And this is just an experimenter in a white lab coat. Can you imagine your commanding officer in the military, or obeying the president or some other person of authority, of power? Have we done horrible things here? Of course we have. I don't have to remind you guys about that if you know your history, right? That's what Milgram found. And it's an awful thing, right? But yes, many people will unquestionably obey authority. Okay, and I want to remind you guys, what the heck happened January 6th? What do you think happened? Someone encouraged people, right, to do that stuff, to storm the Capitol, to go in there and force their way in. That person has not taken responsibilities. He didn't directly say the words, right, but encouraged that, and that's what happened. And you had all those people storming the Capitol, trying to kill other people, right? And why did they do it? Because most people will obey who they consider to be their authority, and will sometimes do awful things that they wouldn't necessarily do on their own, but someone of authority told them to do so. And they like that person, they obey that person, or maybe they don't want to get punished. In this case, the person didn't really have the power to punish you, right? But people went along with it, right? I've been saying for many years, I've been teaching this class for a while, what if we elect some crazy person that wants people to do horrible things? We did that already. Luckily, this person's no longer in power, and I hope he doesn't get elected again. But that's literally what we got, okay? Should never elect crazy, authoritarian people like that to office. You don't elect assholes to office. That is what happens. People who don't want to give up their power, basically. They want to maintain power at all costs, right? Hitler was an extreme form of that, but it can happen here, and it has happened here. We've done awful things, okay? And I'm not just talking about this one recent person. I'm talking about even before. That's why this study was done. So we have to be careful. Here in the US, you have a right to disobey authority if you disagree with it. You can get punished still, but you have a right to disobey. It is never an excuse, by the way, to say, I was just following orders. That doesn't work here. And that's, by the way, what all those people who were put on trial afterward, after the war crime trials, those Nazis were put on trial. That was their defense. I was just following orders. That doesn't work. That won't get you off, right? But that's what they were doing, and it's not an excuse. I wish I could discuss this with you guys, because I've said some things that, are use some strong language there. Maybe some of you disagree with it, but I stand by what I said, okay? I think that is exactly what happened, okay? Now, how are we doing on time? Okay, now what are the goals of social influence? Okay, why do people do this? Why do people conform? They go along with the group. Why do they agree when somebody asks them something? Why do they obey authority? Okay, well, here's the thing. This is why, according to research. One is to choose correctly. They want to make the correct choice. They literally think that, that if the group is, if they're doing it, that must be the right thing to do. That's the right thing to wear. That's the right way to behave, right? Whether you're at a nudist colony, or maybe you're at a party, or maybe someone is trying to tell you something, right? You go along with them because you want to make the correct choice. You think that's the correct car to buy, or that's the correct person to date, or whatever it is, or to study with, right? Another reason people, or maybe that's the correct person to obey. A lot of those people who stormed the Capitol thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were saving democracy, that the election was unfair and fraudulent, all that stuff. But of course, that's a bunch of bull. It's a bunch of lies that they were fed by, that person who was in power, who was our president at the time. A lot of them thought they were choosing correctly, that they were doing the right thing. A lot of them, by the way, had no excuse, and they knew that was just a bunch of lies, and they still went along with it anyway, because they wanted to basically, keep that person in power. A lot of them just basically were like that, just being awful, okay? And some of them literally thought that they were doing the right thing because that person told them to. That person of authority, that person of power, right? Think for yourself, please, right? But yes, some people do it to choose correctly. Another reason people do it is to gain social approval. They want people to like them, to approve of them. So that's why you go along with the group. You wear what they wear, behave the way they behave. You buy that car, right? Because you want to be approved of, or you say yes to, whatever going on with that person because you like them and you want them to like you, or maybe, you storm the Capitol because you're a member of that party, or you really like that person. You're in that person's group, so to speak, their political party, and you want them to like you. And notice how they all happen to be mostly of one race, right? You want to be approved of by those people who think and behave that way. You're a part of their group, so you went along with them. Notice how little diversity there was there. There was like maybe a black person here and there, a few person there, but mostly it's just one kind of group. And when you see that, by the way, that's usually not the correct side. The correct side is the one that has diversity. That's the nicer group. That is the more accepting and tolerant group, not the other side that all has one kind of people and it's just caters to certain kind of people, right? That's not the right side. But people do it because they want to be approved of by those people. They want to be liked by those people. They want to be liked by their own kind. And they want to protect their own kind, right? Another reason, they want to be consistent with their commitments. They said they believe in something, that they agree with something, so they want to follow up with that, right? If you respect and you love so-and-so, then you will do this, right? You will defend him, you will protect him, right? Or you go along with this group or whatever it is, right? You want to be consistent with those commitments. Let's keep going. More about this, okay? Choosing correctly, competence, authority, social validation. So how does wanting to be accurate, to choose correctly, right, lead others to basically to conform, to comply, to obey? So here's more information about this. I probably said this already because I went on, right? And I get ahead of myself. So one is the competence motive. Right? People have a competence motive, right? They want to master their environment, right? They want to obtain rewards. They want to be competent. They want to obtain rewards. So they want to choose correctly. And that often means they'll just go along with the group. They'll agree with people, or they'll do what the person of authority wants, because they literally feel that that is what will get them that reward. That is the correct thing to do to get that reward. People also will follow authority because they think that the authority must know what the correct thing is. Authority, right? Experts provide shortcuts for good choices. That's an expert. That's the president. He probably knows what he's talking about. If he says the election was rigged, it must have been rigged. No, it wasn't. That person was lying. Okay? That person is not sane. He's mentally ill. Okay? He's an asshole, to tell you the truth. Okay? To speak strongly. All right? Do anything to stay in power. That's not the kind of people we should have in office here. But that's a person of authority. A lot of people believe him and they love him. They'll do anything for him. They'll go along with the group. They'll comply. They will obey. Right? That's a person of authority, more likely to get people to do those kind of things. Social validation, right? The behavior of others validates our choice, right? We are correct. We believe we're correct when we do what other people are doing, whether we're following the group or agreeing with the group or obeying the person who leads the group. Ambiguity, when we're not sure, right? We look to others, when we're not certain. So maybe people weren't sure. Was the election stolen? Was it fraudulent? So they look to others, people like them, and those people seem to agree. So they go along with it too. Oh, it must have been fraud. It must have been stolen. No, it wasn't. Okay. The courts looked at it. They counted and recounted all kinds of things. Nothing suggests there was any fraud. Sure, there were things here and there, but not what they were talking, not this massive fraud that would change the election, not this, that it was stolen. That's a bunch of nonsense, okay? Just to speak plainly about this, okay? You should be aware of that, okay? And some people know this. A lot of people knew this, but they went along with it anyway. Why? Because they like that person. They want to obey that person, and they know they're just being bad, but they went along with it anyway. And then after, when some of them are being charged now they're trying to make excuses. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was doing this and that. I was just, I thought I was just following, the president's orders and things like that. They're trying to say, yeah, I was just following orders. Or I thought I was right. I thought I was doing the correct thing, protecting our democracy. No, you were destroying it. That's what you were doing. Okay, but that's what it does. That's ambiguity. The next part is about consensus. And we're about halfway. So let me stop there.